everything is urban, so probably it's the study of everything that is on this planet and not out there in the space, but just here at this moment.
When people ask me what urban studies is, like people that are not from EKA, I never really know what to say. So I just say, I just studied cities.
Urban planning is mainly like the planning aspect, but urban studies is kind of like understanding how the economic and political reforms are shaping the space and how the residents feel about all of the steps that happen in urban planning, and like it's kind of a broader understanding of urban planning.
Urban planning is like how actually putting things in plans, how a street looks like. Urban studies is more of like questioning why, looking in the inequalities and justice questions of cities.
It's not about like planning, like to draw a line or to create it different spaces, but I think it's more about this intersection of economic, political, and spaces. So how is these intersections work together?
And you are really able to go on the human scale, I would say, more than in urban planning. Urban planning is rather a little bit further and more technical. Urban studies, really, you can go so much broader.
I think for me, since I'm coming from architecture background, urban studies was a place where I learned a lot about like why before how.
My thesis tells the story of a loss. It was a former factory in Ljubljana, and there was a squatting community there in this abandoned factory, and at the end the municipality had other plans for it, and then they had to evict this community. They both have clashing proposals of what this place should have been, and I felt like this building was somehow telling the story. What is behind something? I was always feeling that I missed something. And when I found about this community, I couldn't help but feel like that was what I was missing. I was very skeptical to put my thesis name injustice, spatialized injustice, because it is such a strong word. But then I understood after getting to know more that the only way to get to middle ground to justice is understand what is wrong, what is unjust. When you do harm to others, then we can really talk about justice, because otherwise we will always talk about some ideal that we'll never achieve.
My thesis has been about this research that I've been doing, how to respond to housing crisis and over-tourism and gentrification crisis, and how this resistance is manifested through the city. And every time I come back, it's different. These places are closing, people are leaving, my friends are all leaving. I've engaged with some groups, with some collectives that exist in the city. I've also feel like I complained so much about what's happening in Lisbon and this sort of precarity and how hard it is to find houses and jobs and etc. But I was never willing to join any of these groups. I knew they existed. And before I was very hopeless, and now I become more hopeful to the city. I think that there's people who are willing to fight for it, that is not necessarily a lost cause. And my story is in Lisbon, but this is something that has been happening across many countries and many places in the world. But I also decided to focus it more from my readings and my theoretical framework, mostly on Southern European cities, because I think it's quite a singular phenomenon in Lisbon, Barcelona, Athens, Rome, Venice, this sort of strong touristic cities in South Europe. For this gentrification and over-tourism part, I mostly try to focus either on Portuguese writers or Spanish writers, Greek writers or Italian writers, because I feel like these people have a different way of seeing this than a person from Berlin or a person from Amsterdam or Paris would have.
My thesis is about a town in Peru called Lobitos. The main protagonists are the fisherman community, because I have realized that everything that I have read about Lobitos was all about the other actors rather than the fisherman community, but the fisherman community paradoxically stayed in the town for the longest period. Then I kind of created those dynamics when I related them with the surfers, with the oil industry, with the industrial fishing, and all those other actors that are present in the space. So my theory is based on the southern urbanism and how we should rethink of like what urbanism in general or urban planning is, and how we can't or we shouldn't apply models from elsewhere to a particular context. So there are like different ways of how urbanism can take place, and the space as such should be learned from within than about. And then my message is it formality the only way of how we understand urbanism, or are there any other way of how we see and understand what's happening in the city?
I'm looking at the city of Vienna, and then investigate in river regulation and floodings in general. And I'm going back in the history of Vienna and looking at the city structures, asking how the river in Vienna, the Danube, has shaped or tamed the city, and in return the city has shaped the river. One main protagonist is the river, the Danube River, but also Vienna's canals. So there's the Danube Canal, but then also Vienna's residents. I think most important are the governance and politicians behind. A lot of big districts and streets and places have been named by river structures, but residents in Vienna don't think about this. And this is why I wrote this thesis as well, is like to show that there's this other kind of history. I have several scholars, but I think I got most inspired by geographer and urban planner Matthew Gandhi. It's a book called Fabric of Space, and he describes as well like how the relationship of city and its rivers, beginning in Paris with like sewers in Paris and ending up in London with climate change and floods and river regulation.
My story takes place in Hatay, Turkey, starting from the earthquake that happened in 2023. I want to highlight the issue that can be seen in many earthquakes and disasters in general. Like after such cases, the government can use this opportunity to relocate people however they want and create some sort of segregation by doing that. And it was like such a devastating case. I was watching it through news, and then I decided to apply to this urban studies. My thesis is mainly around 4 different theoretical sources. First one being the Andrew Rosso's disaster time, which is explaining how the time does not go linear after the disaster, but rather it goes like immediate response, mid-term response, and long-term response can be kind of integrated into each other. And also seeking spatial justice is like my main source, which is written by Edward Soya. It looks into how space can be just or unjust in a way.
My thesis is about Bazar Majewski, which is located in Poland. It's a border twin city. My thesis about the transformation of Bazar Majewski. This transformation happened because of main border connection, because there is like the tax disparities and price differences, border and the policies and EU integration, and the historical post-socialist context as well added to this transformation of Bazar Majewski. Also not simply as a bazaar, but it's a social and cultural space for German and Polish people, like they can communicate. And now it's in the form of declination. I'm using the theory that is called calculated informality by Ananya Roy, because I'm coming from Pakistan and where urban informality is part of everyday life. I also mentioned De Soto, who who sees informality as an absence or failure of state, but rather I wanted to also explore like why in the selective area state is absence, because state is present in any other parts, in any other affairs, in any other places, but why is it absence in that specific area?
So my thesis tells the story of €1 house initiative in Italy. Started from the history, and I used lots of theory in order to build up my final thesis, because for me it was very important that the person who reads my work will actually understand that the initiative didn't came up just like that randomly, but there are many, many aspects that have pushed the country to take on such a radical approach. If you think about the initiative, it may seem like a solution, obviously, because the state, not the municipality, but it should start from the state level, that they should have long time intervened in this topic and really do something. And this means investments, obviously. It's a solution, let's say, in that way, in their eyes right now, seems to be a very market-driven approach and put the responsibility to individuals. The concepts that I used, one of them is human capital, because the level how it impacts the residents, and who I love today is a philosopher, Michel Fehrer. So there was Neil Brenner and his concept of state rescaling and also global impacts. What are the global pressures that actually European Union, not just Italy, is facing today. And obviously, as the topic of housing is very important in my thesis, then it was financialization of housing. And there I used a lot of Manuel Albers, who I love also.
Now that you become more conscious about everything, like different powers, structural dynamics, then you don't see everything like so colorful or so wonderful anymore.
And then I'm starting to answer, what is it all for? And then in a way, maybe it's not about saving that specific place, but it's about keeping the fight going.
I got so fixated. Like, you find something and you're like, oh my God, like, I want to read more. What's going on? Why are the numbers so different? Why are they not doing anything?
I have the feeling I'm meeting people, and this is just gives me hope, and like a lot of people think the same way.
We do see lots of things that are not functioning. It's rather pissing me off, I would say. It actually makes me angry.
We have to adopt, but we have to see also our situation, like how we can move forward. You cannot even like totally reject, but at the same time you cannot totally accept. You have to like see that where you can find that balance, because you have to survive.